In this video, we'll investigate America's youngest death row inmates, teenagers whose crimes were so heinous they received life sentences or execution. We'll reveal the chilling evidence that sealed their fate, examine the broken families and shattered lives left behind, and explore how justice confronts evil in its most unexpected form. Case 1. Evan Miller, the youngest killer. Age of crime, 14. Crimes. Miller killed neighbor Cole Cannon during robbery. Childhood should be about baseball cards and bike rides. For Evan Miller, it became about baseball bats and murder. On July 15, 2003, Evan Miller murdered his neighbor Cole Cannon during a robbery at Country Living Trailer Park near 5 Points, Alabama. Cannon, 52, had been living there for less than a month. The victim was a stranger to violence. Miller was not. The night began with drugs and alcohol. Cannon had fallen asleep after he, Miller, and Miller's friend Colby Smith had indulged in alcohol and marijuana. What should have been a quiet evening in a humble trailer park became the setting for unspeakable brutality. Miller was already stealing when Cannon awakened. Cannon awoke as Miller was replacing Cannon's wallet, and Smith hit Cannon with a baseball bat. That first swing unleashed something monstrous. Miller took up the bat and proceeded to severely beat Cannon. The blows came down again and again. Miller beat Cannon in the face with his fists and repeatedly struck Cannon with a baseball bat. Each strike was calculated. Each impact was deliberate. But Miller wasn't finished. They beat him with a baseball bat, took $350 and his baseball card collection, and set his trailer on fire. The robbery was methodical. The violence was systematic. The fire was a final act of cruelty. Cannon's trailer was set afire, and he was left in the fire to die. Miller and Smith walked away, leaving their victim trapped in the inferno they had created. Cole Cannon died of his injuries and smoke inhalation. The medical examiner's findings revealed the full horror. The cause of Cannon's death was inhalation of product of combustion, but added that multiple blunt force injuries and ethanol intoxication were contributing factors that made it more difficult for Cannon to breathe in the fire or to escape. Miller had beaten Cannon so severely that even if the fire hadn't killed him, the injuries would have prevented his escape. The investigation moved swiftly. Evidence pointed directly to Miller and Smith. Smith pleaded guilty, testified against Miller, and was sentenced to life in prison. Smith chose cooperation. Miller chose defiance. A jury convicted Miller of capital murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. The courtroom watched as a teenager faced the consequences of adult crimes. The judge who ruled on the decision took several things into consideration, including Miller's age at the time of the crime, his early exposure to violence and drug use, and his mental health. But Miller's case would transcend his individual crimes. His conviction became the centerpiece of a landmark Supreme Court case that would change juvenile justice forever. Miller versus Alabama challenged the constitutionality of mandatory life sentences without parole for juvenile offenders. The Supreme Court ultimately ruled that mandatory life sentences without parole for juveniles violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. The decision forced courts to consider individual circumstances before imposing such severe sentences on minors. Miller's case returned Alabama courts for resentencing. When Evan Miller robbed and savagely beat his neighbor, setting fire to the man's trailer and leaving his incapacitated victim to die a horrible death, he earned a well-deserved sentence of life in prison without parole. The new judge reached the same conclusion as the original jury. The resentencing hearing revealed the full scope of Miller's background. His childhood had been marked by violence, drug abuse, and instability. But these factors, while tragic, could not excuse the calculated brutality of his crimes against Cole Cannon. Miller's story forces uncomfortable questions about childhood, violence, and justice. How does a 14-year-old develop the capacity for such calculated cruelty? What circumstances create a teenager capable of beating a man unconscious and then setting him on fire? The case also highlights the victims often forgotten in legal debates. Cole Cannon was a man trying to start over in a new place. His final moments were filled with terror and pain, betrayed by neighbors who should have represented safety, not danger. Today, Miller remains in prison, serving life without parole. His case changed American law, but couldn't change the fundamental truth. A man died in flames because a child chose violence over conscience. The legal system may debate the punishment, but the crime remains unchanged. A 14-year-old boy committed murder with a cold calculation of a hardened killer. Miller's legacy extends beyond his individual crimes. His case established precedent that continues to influence juvenile justice decisions across America. But for Cole Cannon's family, no legal precedent can restore what was lost in that burning trailer on a July night in 2003. Case 2. Jesus Ayala and Jammer Keys, the video killers. Age of crime: 17 and 16. Crime: intentionally struck and killed retired police chief Andreas Probst while cycling. Recorded the murder on video August 2023, Las Vegas. On August 14th, 2023, a retired police chief went for his morning bike ride in Las Vegas. He never came home. What happened next would shock a nation and expose the deadly intersection of social media culture and juvenile violence. Andreas Probst, 64, was a former California police chief who had dedicated his life to public service. After retiring, he moved to Las Vegas with his wife, Crystal, to enjoy their golden years. Every morning, he would bicycle through the quiet streets of the Centennial Hills neighborhood, maintaining the fitness routine that had sustained him through decades of law enforcement. On that August morning, Probst was riding eastbound on Centennial Parkway when a white sedan approached from behind. The car didn't slow down. It didn't swerve. Instead, it accelerated directly toward the unsuspecting cyclist. The impact was devastating. Probst was thrown from his bike and died at the scene. Inside the car were Jesus Ayala, 17, and Jammer Keys, 16. They weren't strangers to violence. Earlier that morning, they had allegedly struck another cyclist in a separate hit-and-run incident. But this attack was different. This one was recorded. As the car approached Probst, someone inside captured the moment on video. The footage would later surface on social media, showing the deliberate nature of the attack. The car's occupants could be heard laughing and making comments as they aimed their vehicle at the retired police chief. The video ended with the sickening sound of impact and the sight of Probst's motionless body. The recording revealed the calculated nature of the crime. This wasn't a tragic accident or a moment of poor judgment. It was premeditated murder, committed for the apparent thrill of it and documented for social media consumption. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police launched an immediate investigation. The white sedan was quickly identified, and within hours, both suspects were in custody. Ayala and Keys were arrested at their homes without incident. But their alleged crime spree wasn't limited to the attacks on cyclists. Police connected the pair to multiple other incidents that same day, including attempted murder charges for the earlier hit-and-run. The pattern suggested a rampage of violence that escalated throughout the morning, culminating in Probst's death. The case took on added significance because of the victim's background. Probst had spent 35 years in law enforcement, serving communities in California before his retirement. His death struck a particular chord with police officers nationwide, who saw the attack as an assault on one of their own. The legal proceedings began in September 2023, when both suspects were formally charged. Ayala faced 14 charges, including murder with the use of a deadly weapon, battery with the use of a deadly weapon, and attempted murder. Keys faced 13 similar charges. Both pleaded not guilty to all counts. The case was complicated by questions about the defendant's mental competency. In October 2024, Ayala was found not competent to stand trial, delaying the proceedings while he received treatment. However, by March 2025, he was deemed competent, allowing the case to move forward. The prosecution faced a challenging task of proving that two teenagers had committed premeditated murder while using a vehicle as a weapon. The video evidence was crucial, but it also raised questions about the role of social media in motivating youth violence. Defense attorneys argued that their clients' ages should be considered as mitigating factors. They pointed to recent Supreme Court decisions, including Miller versus Alabama, which recognized that juvenile brains are still developing and that young offenders have greater potential for rehabilitation. The case highlighted the ongoing debate about how to handle juvenile offenders who commit adult crimes. Unlike the Miller and Jackson cases, which involved 14-year-olds, Ayala and Keys were older teenagers who appear to understand the consequences of their actions. The video footage also distinguished this case from many others. The recording provided clear evidence of intent and premeditation, making it difficult for the defense to argue that the death was accidental or the result of poor judgment. As the case moved toward trial, scheduled for September 2025, both the prosecution and defense prepared for a legal battle that would test the limits of juvenile justice in the digital age. The outcome would determine whether two teenagers would spend the rest of their lives in prison for a crime that shocked the nation and devastated a family. The case served as a stark reminder of how quickly young lives can be derailed by violence and how social media can amplify and document the worst aspects of human behavior. For the Probst family, no legal outcome could bring back their beloved husband and father, but they hoped for justice in a case that seemed to defy comprehension. Case 3. Peyton Gendron, the Buffalo supermarket shooter. Age at crime: 18. Crime: killed 10 black shoppers, wounded 3 others in racially motivated Buffalo supermarket shooting, May 2022. A teenager armed with tactical gear and an AR-15 style rifle walked into a Buffalo supermarket on a Saturday afternoon, live streaming his attack to the world. Within minutes, 10 people lay dead. This was a random violence. It was calculated racial terrorism, meticulously planned and executed by 18-year-old Peyton Gendron. On May 14, 2022, Gendron drove over 200 miles from his home in Conklin, New York, to the East Buffalo Tops Friendly Market. He had chosen this location deliberately. The zip code was 14208, an area with one of the highest concentrations of black residents in New York State. This wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. Dressed in body armor and tactical gear, Gendron arrived at the supermarket at approximately 2:30 p.m. He had attached a camera to his helmet, broadcasting his actions live on the streaming platform Twitch. The 180-page manifesto he had posted online hours earlier revealed his motivation: to kill as many black people as possible. The attack began in the parking lot. Gendron shot 4 people outside the store, killing 3 instantly. Witnesses described the methodical nature of his approach. He moved with purpose, targeting victims based on their race while sparing others. Security footage captured him stepping over wounded victims to continue his rampage. Inside the store, chaos erupted. Shoppers scattered as Gendron stalked the aisles, systematically hunting his victims. He killed 7 more people inside the supermarket, bringing the total death toll to 10. 3 others were wounded but survived. The youngest victim was 20 years old. The oldest was 86. The attack lasted approximately 2 minutes before Gendron encountered Aaron Salter Jr., a retired Buffalo police officer working as a security guard. Salter engaged Gendron, firing multiple shots that struck the teenager's body armor. The vest absorbed the impact. Gendron returned fire, killing Salter instantly. With no more resistance, Gendron turned his weapon on himself. He placed a rifle barrel under his chin, preparing to end his life. But he hesitated. In that moment of indecision, Buffalo police officers arrived on scene. Gendron lowered his weapon and surrendered without resistance. The live stream had been shut down by Twitch within 2 minutes of the attack beginning, but not before capturing the carnage. Clips of the shooting spread across social media platforms despite efforts to remove them. The footage became evidence of premeditated hate. Police arrested Gendron at the scene. His manifesto, posted to the anonymous messaging board 4chan, detailed his radicalization through online forums and his belief in the racist Great Replacement conspiracy theory. The document revealed months of planning, including reconnaissance trips to the Buffalo area to scout potential targets. During interrogation, Gendron showed no remorse. He had specifically targeted the supermarket because demographic data showed it served a predominantly black customer base. He had studied the store's layout, planned his route, and timed his attack for maximum casualties. The federal government charged Gendron with 27 counts, including hate crimes resulting in death and domestic terrorism. State prosecutors filed separate charges, including murder in the first degree and domestic terrorism motivated by hate. The teenager faced potential execution under federal law. On November 28, 2022, Gendron pleaded guilty to state charges to avoid the death penalty at the state level. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the federal case proceeded separately, with prosecutors announcing in January 2024 their intent to seek the death penalty. In court during his state sentencing, Gendron offered a brief apology that rang hollow to victims' families. "I know I can't take it back," he said. Family members rejected his words, calling them meaningless given the calculated nature of his crimes. The Buffalo shooting exposed the deadly real-world consequences of online radicalization. 10 people, all of whom were black, were murdered and 3, one of whom was black, were injured. Gendron's case highlighted how extremist ideology, amplified by social media algorithms, could transform an isolated teenager into a mass killer. At just 18 years old, Gendron had consumed years of racist propaganda online, gradually adopting the belief that white Americans were being replaced by people of color. His manifesto cited previous mass shooters as inspiration, particularly the 2019 Christchurch mosque shooter in New Zealand. The federal death penalty case against Gendron continues as of 2025. His attorneys have requested the trial be moved from Buffalo to New York City, arguing their client cannot receive a fair trial in Western New York due to the local impact of his crimes. The request remains pending. Case 4. Mark Anthony Duke, the family annihilator. Age of crime: 16. Crime: murder father Scott Duke, stepmother Dawn Duke, and stepsisters Cassidy and Caitlin Duke, 1998, Alabama. Most 16-year-olds worry about homework and weekend plans. Mark Anthony Duke worried about eliminating his entire family. On March 2nd, 1998, this Alabama teenager armed himself with shotguns and methodically executed 4 people in their sleep: his father, stepmother, and 2 young stepsisters. The murders occurred at 2327 Chandlerwood Drive in Pelham, Alabama. Duke lived in the house with his father, Randy, 39, Randy's fiancée, Deidre Hunt, 29, and her 2 daughters, Chelsea, 7, and Chalisa, 6. But this wasn't a loving, blended family. It was a powder keg of resentment and rage. Duke had been feuding with his father for months. The teenager wanted to move out and get his own truck, but Randy Duke refused to sign the necessary paperwork. The dispute escalated when Randy threatened to send his son to military school. For most families, this would be a typical parent-child conflict. For the Duke household, it became a death sentence. On the night of March 1st, 1998, Duke recruited his 19-year-old friend Michael Brandon Samra to help with his plan. The 2 teenagers waited until the family was asleep, then crept into the house through an unlocked door. They carried multiple shotguns, ammunition, and a deadly resolve to eliminate everyone inside. The attack began around 2:30 a.m. Duke entered his father's bedroom first, positioning the shotgun inches from Randy's head. He pulled the trigger, killing his father instantly with a close-range blast. The sound woke Deidre Hunt, who began screaming. Duke silenced her with another shotgun blast to the head. The commotion woke the 2 little girls. 7-year-old Chelsea and 6-year-old Chalisa stumbled into their mother's bedroom to find Duke standing over the bodies. In the darkness, they likely couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. Duke showed no mercy. He executed both children with shotgun blasts to their heads. The murders took less than 5 minutes. For people lay dead in pools of blood. Duke and Samra then ransacked the house, stealing Randy's truck keys, credit card, and other valuables. They loaded the bodies into the truck and drove to a remote location, where they dumped the corpses in a wooded area. The next morning, Duke called police to report his family missing. He claimed he had come home to find the house empty and was worried about their safety. Investigators immediately suspected his story. The house showed signs of violence: bloodstains on walls and furniture, spent shotgun shells on the floor. Police quickly focused on Duke as a primary suspect. His demeanor during questioning was described as oddly calm for someone whose family had vanished. When confronted with evidence of the murders, Duke initially denied involvement, but as the investigation intensified, he eventually confessed to the killings. The brutality of the crime shocked even seasoned investigators. Officers on the scene told us it's bad, it's brutal. Pelham PD Captain Tommy Thomas told Oxygen's Family Massacre. The methodical nature of the murders, executing each victim with close-range headshots, demonstrated a level of cold-blooded calculation rarely seen in juvenile offenders. Duke's confession revealed the motive behind the massacre. He was angry about his father's refusal to let him move out and get his own truck, rather than accept these normal parental limits. Duke chose to eliminate the entire family. Investigators found no evidence of abuse or other mitigating circumstances that might explain such extreme violence. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Duke was charged with capital murder for the deaths of all 4 victims. Alabama law allowed for the death penalty for murders committed pursuant to one scheme or course of conduct. Prosecutors argued that Duke's systematic execution of his family qualified under the statute. Duke's youth became a central issue during the trial. At 16, he was old enough to be tried as an adult for capital murder, but questions remained about his mental capacity and the appropriateness of executing someone so young. Defense attorneys argued for life in prison, citing his age and claiming he was influenced by his older co-defendant Samra. The jury wasn't convinced by the defense arguments. They found Duke guilty of capital murder and sentenced him to death. The teenager showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He would spend the next several years on Alabama's death row, becoming one of the youngest inmates awaiting execution. Duke's case eventually reached the U.S. Supreme Court, where it became part of the landmark Roper v. Simmons decision in 2005. The court ruled that executing juvenile offenders violated the Constitution's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. Duke's death sentence was commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Co-defendant Michael Brandon Samra, who was 19 at the time of the murders, remained eligible for the death penalty. He was executed by lethal injection in Alabama on May 16, 2019 at age 42. Prison officials noted that Samra maintained his innocence until the end, claiming Duke had forced him to participate in the murders. Duke remained incarcerated at the Holman Correctional Facility near Atmore, Alabama. Now in his 40s, he has spent more than half his life behind bars for the murders he committed as a teenager. The case continues to serve as a stark reminder of how quickly family disputes can escalate into unthinkable violence when combined with easy access to firearms and a complete absence of empathy. Case 5. Forrest Johnson. The questionable conviction. Age of crime: 17. Crime: alleged murder of Jefferson County Sheriff's Deputy William Hardy, 1995, Alabama. Some death row inmates maintain their innocence until the end. Few have their claims supported by the very prosecutor who put them there. Forrest Johnson has been on Alabama's death row since 1998 for a crime he had nothing to do with, according to mounting evidence that has transformed his case into one of the most compelling wrongful conviction claims in recent memory. On July 19, 1995, Jefferson County Deputy Sheriff William Hardy was shot dead while working his second job as a hotel security guard. Hardy, a 23-year veteran of the Sheriff's Department, was investigating a disturbance in the parking lot of Ramada Inn in Birmingham when 2 gunshots ended his life. The murder sent shockwaves to the law enforcement community and launched a frantic investigation. 5 different young black men were arrested and charged in connection with the crime, but only Mr. Johnson was convicted. Johnson, who was 22 at the time of the murder, became the prime suspect based largely on the testimony of 2 witnesses whose credibility would later be called into serious question. The prosecution's case against Johnson rested on shaky ground from beginning. No physical evidence links him to the crime, and investigators found no fingerprints, DNA, or ballistics evidence connecting him to the scene. The murder weapon was never recovered. Most damaging to the prosecution's theory was the testimony of multiple alibi witnesses. On the night of July 19, 1995, when Deputy William Hardy was killed, at least 10 alibi witnesses placed Forrest Johnson and his friend Ardragus Ford at a party across town. These witnesses, many of whom had no connection to Johnson, consistently testified that he was present at the gathering during the time frame when Hardy was murdered. The timeline made it physically impossible for Johnson to have committed the crime. The prosecution's case hinged on the testimony of 2 key witnesses: Violet Ellison, who claimed she heard Johnson confess to murder, and Ardragus Ford, Johnson's friend who initially denied any involvement but later changed his story. Both witnesses had significant credibility issues that the jury never fully learned about. Ellison was a jailhouse informant with a history of providing testimony in exchange for benefits. She claimed Johnson confessed to her while they were both in jail, but her story contained inconsistencies that were never properly explored during the trial. Ford's testimony was even more problematic. He initially maintained Johnson's innocence, but later claimed Johnson had confessed to him. The jury was not told that Ford had been offered a plea deal in exchange for his testimony. Johnson was convicted after his first trial ended in a hung jury. The second trial, held in 1998, resulted in a conviction and death sentence. But even then, the prosecution struggled to present a coherent theory of the crime. Different witnesses provided conflicting accounts of what happened that night, and the state's timeline kept shifting as new evidence emerged. The case began to unravel years later, when new evidence emerged about prosecutorial misconduct. Alabama death row prisoner, hopeful to win new trial, became the headline that captured national attention. The evidence showed that prosecutors had failed to disclose key information to Johnson's defense team, including deals made with witnesses and evidence that contradicted their case. In an unprecedented move, Linda Scherer, one of the original prosecutors who secured Johnson's conviction, filed a sworn statement supporting his bid for a new trial. Scherer argued that the evidence she had seen since a conviction convinced her that Johnson was likely innocent. Her statement detailed prosecutorial errors and misconduct that had tainted the original trial. The Alabama Criminal Court of Appeals sent 2-4 Johnson's case back to circuit court for a new evidentiary hearing. The appeals court ordered a lower court to examine new evidence that had emerged since the conviction, including testimony from witnesses who had been threatened or coerced into providing false testimony. The support for Johnson's innocence has grown steadily over the years. A gathering for Alabama death row inmate 2-4 Johnson draws 400 people at a rally supporting his case. The crowd included family members, activists, and legal professionals who believe Johnson is innocent of the crime that put him on death row. Johnson's legal team has filed multiple appeals challenging his conviction. They argue that the original trial was fundamentally flawed due to prosecutorial misconduct, ineffective assistance of counsel, and exclusion of crucial evidence. The appeals have focused on a lack of physical evidence, the questionable testimony of key witnesses, and the strong alibi evidence that was minimized during the original trial. The case has attracted support from prominent legal figures and innocence advocates. The Innocence Project has taken up Johnson's cause, arguing that a conviction represents a clear miscarriage of justice. The Innocence Project noted that prosecutors had trouble from the start and were unable to settle on a theory about who committed the murder. Johnson's case is controversial, and his quest for a new trial has attracted widespread support, from prominent lawyers to death penalty opponents who view his case as emblematic of the flaws in the capital punishment system. The case has become a rallying point for those who argue that the death penalty should be abolished due to the risk of executing innocent people. As of 2025, Johnson remains on Alabama's death row, while his legal team continues to fight for a new trial. Johnson, 49, has spent half his life on Alabama's death row for the murder of a sheriff's deputy, a killing he says he did not commit. His case represents one of the most compelling claims of innocence on death row today, supported by a growing body of evidence that suggests a grave injustice was done. The question that haunts Johnson's case is simple. How does an innocent man end up on death row? The answer lies in a combination of prosecutorial misconduct, ineffective defense representation, and a system that prioritizes securing conviction over finding the truth. Whether Johnson will ultimately receive the new trial he seeks remains to be seen, but his case has already highlighted serious flaws in the capital punishment system that demand attention. The teenage killers we've examined challenge everything we believe about childhood and redemption. Their brutal crimes and ultimate punishments expose the darkest possibilities of human nature, leaving behind shattered families, broken communities, and a haunting realization that monsters come with the faces of our own children.